The cardiologist's office smelled like recycled air and quiet dread. That's what I remember most, not the diplomas on the wall or the anatomical heart model sitting on the corner of the desk, but the smell, like the building itself was holding its breath alongside me. Dr. Whitman had been my doctor for 6 years. Good man, straightforward, never softened things more than necessary. He set a folder on the desk between us and said, "The procedure is scheduled for the 14th. The out-of-pocket cost after Medicare is $3,200. We'll need that confirmed before we can move forward." $3,200. I sat with that number for a moment. The way you sit with something you already knew was coming, but hoped might be different. I'd taught school for 31 years, built my life on a teacher's salary, then an administrator's salary, neither of which ever made anyone rich. My pension covered my rent in Cincinnati, my utilities, my groceries, the 4 prescriptions that kept me functional. I had $940s in savings. I'd been watching it the way a man watches water drain from a bathtub, slow, steady, inevitable. I told Dr. Whitman I'd handle it. He nodded the way doctors do when they can see you're lying to both of them. I sat in my truck in the parking garage for a few minutes before I made the call, watched a young couple walk past with a stroller, laughing about something, oblivious to the conversation that was about to happen 3 floors above street level between a man and his phone. Then I picked it up. My son answered on the second ring. I could hear noise behind him, office sounds, people talking, that particular energy of a room where money is being made and people know it. "Dad, hey, can I call you back in 20? I'm right in the middle of something. I need to talk to you now. It's about the heart procedure." A pause. The background noise softened slightly, like he'd stepped away from it. "You okay?" "I need $3,200 by next Thursday. The procedure can't happen without it." Silence. Then, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, I heard him say something to someone in the room, muffled, his hand over the receiver. A woman's voice responded. His wife. He came back on. "Dad, listen. I just closed on a property in Hyde Park. Biggest commission I've had all year. But you know how real estate works. The money doesn't clear for another 6 to 8 weeks. It's all still in escrow. The procedure is in 11 days. I know, but the timing. My heart function is at 42%, I said. The doctor says if we don't address this now, we're looking at significant deterioration. That's not my interpretation. That's what he wrote in the notes. More silence. His wife said something again. I heard the word complicated. "Dad, I honestly don't know what you want me to do here. I can't manufacture cash that isn't accessible yet. I'll see what I can move around and call you tonight, okay? Tonight for sure." He didn't call that night. He didn't call the next morning either. Hello everyone, and welcome. Before we begin, I want to ask you to like and subscribe if stories like this mean something to you. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from today. I love hearing from all of you. Just a note, this story blends real experiences with fictionalized details, shared for the purpose of the lessons it carries. The truth of it lives in the feeling, not the facts. I spent 31 years as a public school educator in Cincinnati, Ohio. 22 years in the classroom teaching American history, 9 years as principal of Westbrook High on the city's west side. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because it matters to what comes next. I gave everything I had to that school. I knew the names of every student who passed through those doors during my 9 years as principal. Not because I had a good memory for names, but because I made it a point to learn them. I knew which kids were going home to difficult situations. I knew which ones needed a push and which ones needed someone to just sit with them for 5 minutes without asking anything at all. I drove students home when buses couldn't be arranged. I covered school supplies out of my own pocket more times than I could count, more times than my wife ever fully knew. I stayed late on Fridays for kids who had nowhere better to go. My wife passed 7 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis. My son was living in Columbus at the time, building his real estate career. He drove up for the funeral, stayed 2 nights, then drove back. We've talked maybe once every 6 weeks since, sometimes less. My daughter lives in Phoenix with her husband and their 3 kids. Farther away in miles, never in feeling. After the call with my son, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my bank statement. 9:32. The procedure cost $3,200. Simple arithmetic, a gap of 1,259.60 that I did not know how to close. I'd already gone through the obvious channels, called insurance about the coverage gap, looked into the hospital's financial assistance program, asked about a payment plan. The payment plan required $2,000 up front. I didn't have it. I'm not a man who asks for help easily. 31 years of being the person other people came to. You stop thinking of yourself as someone who can need things. The need feels foreign, almost like an admission of something. I went to bed that night without eating, lay there in the dark, listening to my heart doing what it did now. That slightly off rhythm that had started about 18 months ago. The reason I knew Dr. Whitman's name in the first place. I counted the days to the 14th. I counted the gap between what I had and what I needed. I didn't sleep much. The knock came the next afternoon. I almost didn't answer it. I'd been sitting in the living room not doing much of anything, which is its own kind of exhaustion, the kind that settles in when you've run out of options and your mind just circles. But the knock came again, patient rather than urgent, so I went to the door. She was standing on the porch in a gray hoodie and jeans, hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from the October cold. I didn't recognize her for a moment. The face was familiar the way faces get when you've seen them in a different context, a different decade. Then it clicked. I'd last seen her at her own high school graduation, 17 years ago. She'd been one of those students who made you remember why you got into teaching in the first place. Not because she was the easiest kid in the room, but because she was one of the hardest. She came from a home that didn't give her much, failed 9th grade English twice, cycled through 3 different foster placements during her sophomore year. I'd sat with her in my office one afternoon when she was 16, and on the verge of dropping out, staring at the floor, like it held the answer to a question she hadn't figured out yet. And I'd said something to her that I'd meant completely, and then mostly forgotten, that the size of where you come from is not the size of where you're going. She graduated, went to community college, got her accounting certificate, and then life carried both of us in different directions, and I lost track of her the way you lose track of hundreds of students over a long career, not from lack of caring but from the sheer volume of lives passing through. Mr. Hargrove called me, she said. He was my former vice principal, still connected to the school community, still the kind of man who noticed when someone he respected was struggling. He said you were having some trouble with a medical bill. I shook my head. You didn't need to come out here. I know I didn't need to. She held up a plain white envelope. I wanted to. I stared at that envelope. I'm not a man who cries easily, but I came close right then, standing at my own front door at 63 years old, looking at a young woman I'd spent maybe 20 total hours with over the course of her high school career. Come inside, I said, it's cold. She sat at my kitchen table and set the envelope in front of her and told me about her life in the years since I'd last seen her. She ran a small residential cleaning business now, 4 employees, 3 vans, contracts with a dozen families, and 2 small office buildings across the east side. Took her 8 years to build from a part-time job and a second-hand car. It's $1,500, she said, sliding the envelope toward me. It's not all you need, but it's what I have right now without touching payroll. I pushed it back. I can't take your business money. It's not business money. I keep payroll in a separate account. This is mine. She pushed the envelope back again. You sat with me in your office when I was 16 and I told you I was done, I was leaving. There was no point. And you didn't argue with me like I was wrong. You told me the specific reasons why I was wrong. She paused. You said, I have watched you solve problems in the past 2 years that most adults in this building couldn't handle. Don't you dare call that nothing. I wrote it down when I got home. I still have the paper. I didn't have words for that. There may not be words. I'm not asking for anything back, she said. I'm asking you to let me help you the way you helped me. I took the envelope. Didn't count it then. Didn't need to. My son called that evening. 9 days after I'd first told him about the procedure, 2 days after she'd been at my table. He said he'd been thinking, and he might be able to pull together something around $500 in the next few weeks, But the timing was complicated, and the market right now was, I said, I have what I need. A pause. Good, that's really good, Dad. That was the whole conversation. 11 days later, Dr. Whitman performed the procedure at Christ Hospital. It went the way it was supposed to go. I was home by early evening with a sheet of instructions and a follow-up in 2 weeks. I sat in my recliner with the television on low and thought about things the way you think when something has reminded you that your time is not unlimited. 2 months after the procedure, a letter arrived from the state teachers' retirement system. They were conducting a routine audit related to a policy change requiring verifications of any third-party authorizations on retirement accounts. They asked me to confirm or deny several transactions on my record. I read the letter twice standing at the mailbox in the cold. I didn't recognize the transactions. I called the number listed. A woman named Sylvia walked me through what the audit had flagged. 6 years ago, a written authorization had been submitted using my name and what appeared to be my signature, granting cosigner access on a line of credit tied to my retirement account. The line of credit had been drawn on twice, once for $18,000, once for $11,000. Both amounts had since been repaid, but the authorization was still active on my account. I asked whose name was on the filing. She told me. I already knew before she finished the sentence. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. The winter light coming through the window was thin. My coffee went cold on the table in front of me. I thought about the conversation in that parking garage. The way his voice had changed when he stepped away from the room. The word complicated in his wife's voice in the background. I called a retired attorney I'd known since he was a 9th grader at Westbrook in the 1980s, one of the kids who'd grown up and stayed in touch. I told him what I knew and asked him to find out what else there was to find. He called back 4 days later. What he'd uncovered wasn't dramatic. It was just methodical, quiet, and had been going on long enough that the pattern was clear once you knew to look. My son's real estate career had looked solid from the outside since he'd moved to Columbus. Nice commissions, good listings, a house in a good zip code. But underneath, he'd been carrying significant debt since about 6 years ago, when a group of investment properties he'd staked real money on went sideways in a down market. He'd borrowed to cover losses, then borrowed again to cover the loans. When his own credit could no longer carry the weight, he'd used mine, not once. Twice that we'd confirmed, the retirement account cosign and a short-term business loan from a private lender that had my name on the authorization and a signature that was close enough to mine to pass a loan officer, but would not have passed a serious handwriting examination. Both loans had been repaid. On paper, no lasting damage. But my credit history had been used without my knowledge or consent to keep his operation afloat during years when he could have called me, could have said he was struggling, could have asked me the same question I'd had to ask him. I wasn't furious in the way I'd expected to be. What I felt was something older and heavier, the particular sadness of understanding that someone you loved had been in serious trouble for years and decided the solution was to use you rather than come to you. My daughter called that Sunday the way she did every week, and I told her everything. She went quiet in the way she does when she's deciding how much to say. Then she said, "When are you going to talk to him?" "When I know what I want to say." "That's fair," she said. "And then, however this goes, I'm here." "I know you are, sweetheart." She'd offered to fly out for my procedure. I'd told her not to, that it was manageable, that I'd be fine. She'd sent a card with $100 folded inside and a handwritten note. "I know you'll tell me not to send this, so I'm sending it anyway. You taught us that taking care of each other is not optional." I had the note on the refrigerator. I called my son on a Thursday afternoon and asked him to come up that weekend. He agreed without asking why, which meant some part of him already suspected. He pulled into my driveway on Saturday in his company car. Got out looking the way he always looked, dressed well, slightly distracted, part of him somewhere else. We shook hands at the door the way men do when they've drifted far enough apart that the natural greeting has become uncertain. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table. I put the documents in front of him, the authorization filing with the signature, the loan record, the report showing the activity on my account and the timeline. He looked at them for a long time, his jaw was tight. "I was going to pay everything back before you ever had to know," he said finally. "And I did. Both loans are settled. I didn't damage your credit. You used my name without asking me." "I know. When I called you from the cardiology parking garage and told you I needed $3,200 to keep a procedure from being canceled, you've told me the money wasn't available." He was quiet. "Were you able to help me?" He didn't answer. "I'm asking you directly. When I called you, did you have access to funds that could have covered what I needed?" He looked at the table. The silence went on long enough to be its own answer. "Don't manage this," I said when he started to speak. "Don't treat this like a negotiation. I'm your father. I'm asking you a direct question." He stopped, set his hands flat on the table, looked at me. "Yes," he said, "I had it." The kitchen was very quiet. "I don't know why I didn't," he continued, and his voice had changed, lost whatever professional layer had been sitting on top of it. "I think I was ashamed about all of it. The debt, the loans, using your name. I thought if I admitted I could help you, you'd ask questions, and I didn't want to answer them. So you let me believe my own son couldn't spare $3,200 to keep a heart procedure from being postponed. I'm sorry, Dad." I let that sit. "A 22-year-old woman who runs a cleaning company drove across town in 40-degree weather," I said. "She sat in that chair. She handed me $1,500 in cash. She told me I'd changed her life when she was 16 years old, that something I said to her in my office one afternoon had stayed with her for 17 years. She gave me what she had without any hesitation and without any conditions." He wiped his face. He was crying now, not quietly, not controlled. "She did that," I said, "because she remembered who showed up for her. And I have been sitting here trying to understand when you forgot that was what family meant." I slid a piece of paper across the table. I'd written 3 things on it. The first, a formal written acknowledgement of what he'd done, signed before a notary, so there was documentation if anything ever surfaced on my record in the future. The second, a real conversation with his sister, not a text, not a brief call, a genuine accounting of where things had stood, what he'd done, and what he'd allowed to happen when I'd needed him. The third one made him go still when he read it. A donation to the Westbrook High Student Emergency Fund, the account the school kept for students facing sudden crisis, the kind of hardship that made the difference between staying and dropping out. The amount on the paper was $3,200. He looked up. "Is that?" "That's what it cost," I said, "not as punishment, as understanding, so that some kid sitting in an office somewhere, wondering if there's any point in continuing, gets something instead of nothing." He read the list again. Something moved through his face that I recognized, because I'd seen it on students over the years. The moment when a person stops calculating and starts actually feeling the weight of what they're holding. "Okay," he said, "all 3. "There's something else," I said. He looked up. "I'm not walking away from this. You are my son, and I am not capable of that. But I need you to hear something I apparently failed to teach clearly enough, in spite of 31 years of standing in front of young people and trying." I leaned forward. "Showing up is not optional. It is not something you do when the timing is convenient and the risk to yourself is low. When someone you love needs you, genuinely needs you, not in theory but right now, today, you find a way. You don't calculate. You don't deflect. You show up. That is what the word family means, and if it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean anything." He nodded, his eyes were still wet. "I need to believe you heard that." "I heard it," he said. "I hear it." He did all 3 things. The notarized acknowledgement came back within the week. He called his sister. She told me about it afterward, that he'd talked for a long time and listened more than he spoke, which was not something that had always come easily to him. The Westbrook contribution was confirmed by a letter to my address, because I'd asked the school to notify me directly. He started calling more consistently after that. Not every day, that would have felt performed and we both knew it. But regularly, real conversations, the kind where you say the actual thing instead of the presentable version of it. "I don't know who we're going to be to each other in 5 years, but we're building towards something. And I know who started that process. And I know what made it possible. She came by for coffee in late November. I'd asked her over because it was the smallest thing I could think to do, and small things matter. She sat at the kitchen table again. Same chair, and we talked for nearly 2 hours. About her business, about her employees, about the 2 clients she'd lost, and the 4 she'd gained in the last quarter, about what it had taken to get there. I asked her if the $1,500 had created any real hardship. She said, "Nothing I couldn't handle." "I want to pay it back," I said. She shook her head. "That's not why I brought it." "I know it isn't, that's why I want to." She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "Then put it somewhere it'll do what you used to do." I wrote the check the following week. To the Westbrook Emergency Fund, the same account my son had contributed to. Her name in the memo line. A different kind of return, and exactly the right one. The winter eased into something milder than usual that year. In December, I went back to see Dr. Whitman. The procedure had done what it was supposed to do. My heart function had climbed from 42% to 58%. He said, "Keep walking, keep sleeping, watch the salt." I told him I would do my best. Driving home, I stopped in a gas station parking lot and sat for a few minutes with the engine running and the radio off. 63 years old, a heart working better than it had been. A son I was learning to know in a different way than I had before. A daughter who had always known me. A former student who had reminded me, without meaning to make a point of it, what it looks like when the things you give without expectation find their way back to you. I didn't plan any of this. None of it went the way I would have chosen. But somewhere in the middle of the worst of it, I learned something I should have already understood. Something I probably taught in some form or another over 31 years, without ever having it tested the way it was tested here. Family is not something you inherit. It is something you demonstrate every day, in the moments that are inconvenient and costly and uncertain. My son had forgotten that for a while. He's working to remember it now. And the young woman who knocked on my door, she never forgot. She became exactly who she decided to become the afternoon. She stopped being 16 and started believing she was worth something. She learned that from somewhere, from some collection of moments and people and choices over the years. I'd like to think I was one small part of it. That's the part worth passing on. Not the crisis, not the betrayal, not even the resolution. Just that, what you give without calculation has a way of returning to you. Changed in form but unchanged in truth, exactly when you need it most.